A pleasant afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Dream Philippines 2046, a proposed roadmap for the Philippines and the Filipino up to the year 2046, a partnership event with the Center for Excellence and Governance, Institute for Solidarity in Asia, and the Institute of Corporate Directors. My name is Thea, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Before we start, we would like to remind you of the following for us to have a fruitful session. You may submit your questions as well as give feedback or reactions through the Q&A section and chat box, and the speakers will discuss them later in the Q&A part. To help background noise to a minimum, make sure you are on mute when you are not speaking. Lastly, should you encounter any technical issues during the session, you may contact any of our ICD staff by messaging them through the chat box. Thank you. And before we formally start the program, let us first gather for the invocation to be followed by the Philippine National Anthem.
Dearest Lord, pray for our nation. Strengthen and defend us in our daily battles. Help us to fight for our country by being good citizens and being part of the solution. Keep safe our families and the godly values we hold. We pray for our people that we may grow united in love and appreciation for who we are as Filipinos. May we extend a hand to each other in selfless giving, even when we feel we are the ones in need. Teach us to choose our leaders well. We pray for our leaders. Give them your heart and wisdom to govern humbly and justly. Make them worthy examples of righteousness for the youth to emulate. We claim your victory in our land, O Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang mag-ibig, pero sa silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyag ka ng mag-ibig, sa mandulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit ng pagaw, ay hinatang tulad, awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang isang ang matawad mo'y tagumpay na nag-iinit. Ang ituwing at araw niya kailan pa may magdidinig. Luman ang araw ng walhati pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang hindi kaya ng pagkay mga amin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
To give the opening remarks, we have Dr. Jesus P. Estanislao, currently chairman of the Center for Excellence and Governance and Center for School Governance. He is also a visiting professor, IESE Business School of the University of Navarra in Barcelona, Spain, Chair Emeritus of the Institute of Corporate Directors and of the Institute for Solidarity in Asia. He was the founding president of the University of Asia and the Pacific. He served as the Economic Planning Secretary of the Philippines, and he subsequently also served as the Secretary of Finance of the Philippines. He capped his banking career as chairman and CEO of the Development Bank of the Philippines, and he holds a PhD in economics from Harvard University and an MA in economics from Fordham University. He obtained his bachelor's degree from the University of San Carlo in Cebu, Philippines. Let us all give a warm welcome to Dr. Jesus P. Estanislao.
Have a good day. I would like to welcome you to this webinar. And my name is Dr. Jess Stanislao. I am from the Center for Excellence in Governance. And my task this morning is to present to you what Dream Philippines is really about. We in ICD and ISA have been talking a great deal about Dream Philippines. Maybe it's about time that we explain what it is really about. And the first one that I would like to stress is that Dream Philippines is an advocacy for the transformation not only of the Philippines, but of the Filipino people. And when we talk about advocacy, we're promoting it, we're pushing it, we're contributing to it. And when we talk about transformation, it is about radical change for the better. That is what really we are aiming at. The radical change of the conditions that make up the Philippines and of the conditions in which we Filipinos live and work. And it really builds on the governance advocacy that we've been doing with ISA and ICD. And as you know, ICD is pitched to corporate governance, and its sister institute, the Institute for Solidarity in Asia, is focused on governance of public institutions in the Philippines. And over the years, we have proven that corporate governance does work in our country. 20 of our public field district corporations already are considered among the very best in ASEAN. They're scoring in the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard 97.5 or higher out of a possible 100. And we can push those numbers up to really make sure that every corporation, or at least the great majority of our corporation, become instruments for business development and economic development and the economic progress of our own people. And what have we been doing in ISA? It is in public sector advocacy to transform local government units and national government agencies from where they were to units that better serve the best interests of the Filipino people. The most recent examples that we have is the Bureau of Customs, one of the most corrupt agencies of the Philippine government. Over the past 3 years, they've been transforming themselves, and now they have become a much more respectable public sector institution. And perhaps this is much more controversial. Our Department of Health, which got us out of 122 countries, and we were at the bottom of it at the beginning of COVID. And at the end, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, we're already at level 33 out of 122, surpassing even many of the more developed countries in the way how we handle COVID. Now, I know it's very controversial, but in fact, the Department of Health has been rated as having one of the more successful agencies that actually handled the COVID pandemic in many parts of the world. Now, all of these things have been done these past several years. Corporate governance and public governance. We have shown that in fact governance does work at the level of corporations and at the level of public sector institutions, including, by the way, local government units. Given that success, using that as a base, we're now aiming at much higher. Can we do something about the governance of the country taken as a whole? Instead of just complaining about everything, instead of denigrating the Filipino, can we pull together and say, can we make governance work for the betterment and the transformation of our own beloved country and of our own people? That is what Dream Philippines is about. So it builds on, in fact, the work that has been done in ICD for corporate governance, in ISA for public governance. So we talk about good governance and transformation, now applied not only to corporations and public sector institutions, but to the nation as a whole, to the Filipino people as a whole. And our argument is, if we can do it at the level of corporations and national government agencies and LGUs, we should be able to do it together, working in close solidarity with one another for the country as a whole. That is, in effect, what Dream Philippines is about. However, we follow a basic philosophy, and that is governance is also from the bottom up. Corporations are transforming themselves. National government agencies and local government units are transforming themselves. From this base, we should now be able to build a much better country, a more progressive Philippines. That's the argument of Dream Philippines. Now it is, however, a response to what NEDA has already done. And before 2016, NEDA already came out with Ambition 2040. Now it was given due cognizance in the past 6 years under the Duterte administration. But now, the same Director General that articulated Ambition 2040 before 2016 is now back at NEDA. And the question, therefore, that we ask is, what can we do as responsible citizens to respond and to complement the call for action that is being done by Ambition 2040? On a personal note, I would like to also say that Dream Philippines, which is from 2022 to 2046, builds on the work that I personally have done in applying the governance prism to our history, our Spanish colonial period from 1565 to 1898, the American colonial period from 1898 to 1946, and our journey as an independent republic from 1946 to 2021. All that has been looked at through the governance prism. Now the question to ask is, based on the lessons learned from looking at the past, using governance as a transformation tool, can we build and shape a much better Philippines moving up to 2046 when we celebrate the first centennial of our independence as a republic? Now, Dream Philippines, therefore, is about our future. It's not just about the past, but it is what we can do together to build a much better future for our country and for our people. And what in fact we're saying is that Dream Philippines has to be not another document, not other pieces of paper, but it has to be action, strategy, what we can do together for the long term. It is therefore about our long-term future, no longer about today or tomorrow or the next elections. But our long-term future all the way up to 2046 has a number of base camps. The first one is 2028, and the second one is 2034, and the third one is 2040, and the fourth base camp is 2046. Now, those of us who are very politically oriented will easily see that these base camps are also the end of every administration. 22 to 28, 28 to 34, 34 to 40, and then 40 to 46. However, Dream Philippines is not only about any government administration. What governments will do, what public officials will do. It is rather about all of us working together to build a better Philippines that we all dream of. So, Dream Philippines is mainly about country. It's not about personalities. It's not about what Duterte has done. It's not about what Marcos will do. Of course, that is very important. But it is what we can do together for our country as a whole. It is also more about outcomes, not popularity ratings. We always keep on tracing the popularity ratings of politicians, the popularity rating of presidents of the Philippines. That is important, but it is not the only thing that counts. What we're presenting in Dream Philippines is that popularity rating, yeah, it's very helpful. However, what we're working for would be substantive outcomes, not political positioning, either for the present or for the future. And it takes into account all the facets of our national life. It's not just all about politics. Politics is very important, but there are many other facets that we really have to work on and have and produce a lot of improvements in. And these are the 8 facets of our nation's life, which are the 8 facets of national governance. Like the 8 rays of our sun, there are 8 basic facets of national governance. The first 3 are foundations, like moral, spiritual. Then we have the political. Then we have the socio-cultural. All these 3 are important, and they're considered as foundations of what we can do together to build the long-term future. Then we have our resource base. The first one, of course, human. The second one is our natural resources. And the last 3 are what I would call as the infrastructure that would enable us to bring our economy forward, our society forward, and our country forward. The 3 infrastructure are, of course, physical: roads, bridges, ports, airports. Then, very important these days, the digital infrastructure that we have. And finally, the eco-financial infrastructure. Now, all of these 8 need significant, substantive, meaningful work in the next 24 years. And what we can do together to make them jibe with one another, complement with one another, so that they can serve as the 8 motors by which we can zoom our economy and society forward. Now, these are the foundations. Then you have our resource base. And then finally, you have our infrastructure. All 8 are important. Mind you, not just politics. Now, Dream Philippines does not limit, therefore, itself only to elections and the officials we elect through elections. Again, I would like to emphasize, elections are important, officials are important, but they count for only a portion of what we do under Dream Philippines. We therefore go beyond SONA and other official declarations of policy. What is important is the strategic direction that is being set for the country, whether in fact we pursue the strategic policies that are needed in order to bring us to the transformative outcomes we have to produce. Now the question is, what can you and I do for Dream Philippines? Just 2 things. First is become an active member of what I call as the community of governance advocates. Be active. Use ICD and ISA as your channels by which you can participate in the work of any one of the 8 groups that are now focusing on the 8 facets of national governance, from the moral, spiritual, all the way up to economic and financial. Be part of this group and help substantiate, and above all, help in the performance assessment and give more concrete meaning and substance to the work that must be accomplished in all of these 8 facets. Therefore, we need your help in all of these subgroups that will be created under each of the 8 facets of national governance. There is an effort to refresh them, to bring them up to date, to dynamize them, and then to assess and monitor performance. It's quite a lot of work, but that is what responsible citizenship is. Now, that's the first. The second is, at the end of the day, there is no substitute to improving our personal governance. That's why I say being a member of the community of governance advocates means that you have to learn, to adopt, and to observe the personal governance paradigm that is now advocated by the Center for Excellence in Governance. But it's not enough to do that. You've got to bring it down to the different aspects of personal life: family, social relationships, and workplace environment, so that each one of us becomes the ultimate governance asset of the Philippines. So we need deep dives into all of these requirements, but you can become an active member of the community of governance advocates simply by doing these 2 things. Be an active participant of Dream Philippines, and be an active proponent of personal governance with all of its manifestations. And if we do that, we can undertake many solidarity initiatives, which in fact create solidarity circles for the comprehensive development of the country. But what is the comprehensive development of the country? At the end of the day, it translates to the improvement for the Filipinos, by the Filipinos, and above all, of Filipinos. Not a single one of us exempted from all of this. Every one of us becoming a part of our dream, and of the dream of the Philippines that we all dream of. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Jess, for your very insightful talk. Truly, your passion for the country and the Filipino people inspires us all. Now, don't worry, because the slides presented earlier will be sent after the program. To officially start the session, it is my pleasure to introduce to everyone our speaker for today. May I call on former ICD Chairman and Vice Chairman for the Center for Excellence in Governance and the Institute for Solidarity in Asia. Let us all welcome Mr. Rex Drilon.
Thank you, Thea. And just give me a few seconds to set up my slides. I will start sharing my screen. Okay, share screen. Okay. Thea, can you see that?
Yes, sir. We can see it.
Oops, I'm sorry, that's the wrong presentation that I. Okay. Okay, is that clear, Thea? Are we on?
Yes, sir. We can see your slide.
Okay, so welcome to this digital symposium on our Dream Philippines, which is a proposed roadmap for the Philippines and for the Filipino up to the year 2046. I am Rex Drilon, former chairman of ICD and currently vice chairman and president of the Center for Excellence in Governance and the Institute for Solidarity in Asia. These slides will be made available to those who would like to request for them, and therefore we don't need to dwell too much on this introduction. The outline of our presentation today is to start with talking about our advocacies in the group. We'll very briefly cover the drivers of societal change, and a very fast state of the nation summary on the economic, social, and political aspects of our national life, a backgrounder on the Dream Philippines project, and then we drill down to what Dream Philippines is all about, that will cover its core objective and the socioeconomic impact that we hope we can make by adopting this project. Then we'll spend time on our governance charter, our proposed statement of values, statement of mission, and statement of vision for the country, which Dr. Stanislao has mentioned has 4 milestones: 2028, 2034, 2040, and 2046. And we'll talk more about the 8 strategic facets that Dr. Jess mentioned earlier, and describe to you the 28 strategic objectives that the convocation that we held in the last 4 months produced in discussing the Dream Philippines. We will not have the time to discuss the 140 strategic initiatives that were proposed during the convocation. And then we'll present to you the 1-page roadmap for Dream Philippines 2046. And just to make sure that we address also part of the global issues, we matching the Dream Philippines 2046 against the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and then present to you a possible scorecard that still needs to be fleshed in the future. This is where the community of governance advocates can help us develop. And then the next steps, of course. Now, what are our governance advocacies in our group? As you probably know by now, Institute of Corporate Directors, or ICD, is focused on corporate governance, and this covers publicly listed companies, private companies, family-owned and controlled corporations, NGOs, and also GOCCs, or government-owned and controlled corporations. ISA, on the other hand, is the Institute for Solidarity in Asia, is focused on public governance, and we have been working with more than 200 NGAs, LGUs, also some GOCCs, and in the last 3 years, we've worked with more than 60 regional hospitals that somehow, I believe, help the country cope with the COVID pandemic. And then for the Center for Excellence in Governance, we will be focusing on personal governance, citizen leadership, community and social responsibility, family, school, and church governance, and of course, final end is Dream Philippines. Now, early in the game, when Dr. Jess and I and a few other kindred souls started this advocacy more than 20 years ago, we agreed that to change society, we need to strengthen the drivers of change in societies. And this is family, where values are formed, the school or the church, and the church, where values are reinforced, enhanced, and strengthened, government, where values are practiced in the public sector, that's ISA, and enterprise, where values are practiced in the private sector. The foundation of all of these governance advocacies is the individual, because the ultimate governance asset, as Dr. Jess emphasizes, is the individual. And the core purpose of this Dream Philippines project is really the transformation of our country and the comprehensive development by the Filipino, of the Filipino, by the Filipino, and for the Filipino. Oh, let's take a step back and just take a look at what's happening in our country or the state of our nation. First of all, the economic environment. We've been averaging less than 4% from 1982 until 2021, and due to the COVID, GDP growth of the country went down to a negative 9.6% 2 years ago and bounced back to 7.7 last year. And for the first semester of 2022, we are at 7.4%, having achieved an 8.3% growth in the first quarter. Inflation was controllable at 3% on the average in the years 2010 to 2019, but COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war happened, and it has breached 6% recently. Our gross international reserves are still healthy, has gone down from 109 at year in 2021, but according to our BSP governor, we are still in good shape, and our average foreign exchange rate, which had been 46 per dollar from 2010 to 2019, is now 55 pesos plus to $1. Our GDP ratio had been at 40% for many, many years until the pandemic hit us, and the Build program of the previous administration has brought these debt levels now to 60% at the end of 2021. We were able to bring down the poverty line from 25% in 2012 down to about 17% in 2018, but again, because of the pandemic, this has gone back to about 23.7%. Our corruption perception index hovered around 35, and we slipped 7 spots in terms of competitiveness in the last year. This is how we compare with some of our ASEAN neighbors in terms of poverty ratio, percentage of population. Again, we have the distinct honor of being at the lowest in terms of poverty headcount ratio, 16.7. This has gone up to 23 as of last year. On the political side of things, we are still struggling with the newly autonomous Bangsamoro region, and they're still in their birthing pains. The CPP, NDA, and NDF manpower has decreased since the year 2000. And the recent national and local elections, though generally peaceful and orderly, revealed many weaknesses in our electoral process. Charges of massive vote buying, mind conditioning, mind manipulation, statistical improbabilities, suspicions of voting machine and server tampering continue to be unexplained and unresolved. Dynastic families further strengthen their dominance in Congress, at about 75% of the congressmen and women come from dynastic families. And many LGUs and in the Senate, we see this spectacle of a mother-son combination, a set of siblings, and another set of half-siblings. So in the political environment, up to now, we are seeing the disconnect between the governors and the governed. And while there are many jewels in the countryside of outstanding public servants, outstanding LGU chief executives, the quality of our public governance is erratic. We also have weakened, divided, and corrupted institutions, not all of them, but many in the executive, legislative, and judiciary branches of government had been weakened, divided, and corrupted. And so there's dissonant leadership at various levels. In the social environment, the biggest achievement has been the conditional cash transfer. More than 4 million families have benefited from this. We've learned from the COVID pandemic, as Dr. Jess said earlier, we were at the bottom of the pile at the start of the pandemic, but towards the end of last year, we have gone up to 33rd place in terms of coping with the pandemic out of the more than 130 countries. And the strategy was, again, as you can see in the graph, 4-pillar strategy against COVID. That has worked for us. But aside from poverty, going back to the 20s, the other problem that we have socially is hunger, because hunger has risen by 20% from 10 to almost 12% in the last 2.5 years. And at the peak of the COVID crisis, unemployment rose to 17% and millions lost jobs as 100,000 plus businesses closed down. There was successful implementation of the K-12 program. However, a survey revealed that only 24% of employers in the country were willing to hire K-12 graduates, as college degree holders are still prioritized. And so we continue to be, as a country, a divided, confused people. We're widening gap between the rich and the poor, struggle in addressing the problems in education. We are raising malnourished and stunted kids, which have generational implications. We have difficulty in dealing with crime, drugs, illegal gambling, peace and order, not to mention a culture of violence. And we are ignoring the needs of the poor and God's other creations. So how did we get to be like this? There are 4 authors that have written books about why the Philippines hasn't yet reached its place in the sun. You have James Fallow, who wrote about the theory of the Filipino as a damaged culture. We have Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson's book on Why Nations Fail, who Rizal himself has taught or written about the indolence of the Filipino. And our favorite is Paul Dumont, who says that reason why we're going through all of these birthing pains is that we are not yet a nation. We are a nation in progress. Whatever the reasons are, we need to rebuild our nation. Our journey towards nationhood will require not only love, not only perseverance, stamina. It needs, among others, a clear vision, a servant leadership, strong sense of country, a culture of good governance, and responsible citizenship. So, what is our response? Our response is Dream Philippines 2046. It is a proposed roadmap for the country and its people. This business of crafting a roadmap started at the turn of the millennium. If you guys remember, at the turn of the century, 2000, there was a impeachment hearing of President Erap at the time, and things were getting very, very iffy. And so Dr. Jess, myself, and a few other like-minded people, with about 50 in all, if I remember right. We had Cora de la Paz, we had Karina David, Constantino David, we had Marixi Prieto, and so on. And so we gathered around a room and discussed what will happen if Estrada becomes impeached. We don't know what the change will be, whether constitutional or extra-constitutional. And just in case that happens, can we please at least draft something to help guide those who are going to take over, at least a glimpse of what the country can be. We called it at the time Philippines 2030, and this was about 2000. So it's a roadmap up to the year 2030. Fortunately, the transition when Estrada was impeached was constitutional. And President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo took over as president. And Other time, we felt that she was very well prepared. She had all the skill set, the motivation, and the patriotism to lead this country. So we shared Philippines 2030. And that went on. Pinoy did okay as president. But during the time of President Duterte, there were issues that came up. The emphasis on the drug war, the emphasis on a lot of other things, the extrajudicial killings, and many, many other things. We felt that maybe it's time to exhume the roadmap that we shared for many, many years. And so we came up with Dream Philippines. And this year, early this year, Dr. Stanislao convened a group of about 100 conveners and sectoral representatives, youth, women, media, academia, corporate people, business people, professionals, and so on. And for 4 months, worked on this roadmap that we're presenting today. And we call it Dream Philippines 2046. The core purpose of this Dream Philippines is the transformation of our country and the comprehensive development of the Filipino by the Filipino and for the Filipino. And if we achieve this, the impact of this will be the country being more productive, more competitive, with higher and sustainable growth and greater equity and inclusiveness. Translated into 3 key metrics, if we are successful in this, we can become top 20 in the world, top 20% of the world in terms of competitiveness. We should be able to grow at the rate of 8 to 10% per capita GDP growth all the way to 2040, 2046. And we will have reduced our Gini coefficient, which is a measure of inequality in our society, down to what it is now at 41.58% to 3.3 or 30%. This is right now how we compare with our neighbors in Asia. We again have the distinction of having the highest Gini coefficient. The higher you are in the Gini coefficients, the more unequal your society is. The only saving grace here is that we are less inequity compared to the Americans. It is at 41.95. So there's a greater disparity of the haves and the have-nots in America. But China, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, all of them are in the 30s. So that is the starting point. We are not where we want to be. And so you develop a roadmap to transform, to change society, to change the country. And it starts with a basic document, which we call the Governance Charter. The Governance Charter is the foundation of any strategic plan or transformation program, whether for the country, for businesses, for national government agencies, for LGUs. It is the foundational statements of values, mission, and vision of these institutions. And what are they? Values are what we strongly believe in as a people. Mission is who we are and what our mandate is, and vision is where we want to be, or what we seek to be with the deadline. So let's start with the proposed values for Dream Philippines 2046. We didn't have to look far because it's already embedded in the laws of the land. Republic Act 8491 talks about the 4 national values of makadiyos, love of God, makabansa, love of country, makatao, respect for the dignity of the individual and love of family, and makakalikasan, which is protection of God's other creations. This is already part of the law of the land. So we didn't need to change this. And just as a reminder, if you look at your passports, all of these four core values of the Filipino are printed in your passports. So from the core values, we go to the mission statement of our country. What is our mission as a people? And here again, we didn't have to look far because the Constitution of our country in the preamble precisely describes what our mission is as a people. We, the Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God, seek to build a just and humane society, establish a government that shall promote the common good, conserve and develop our patrimony, secure the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of law, and secure a regime of truth and justice, love and freedom, equality and peace. Beautiful statement. We couldn't add a comma or a period in this preamble of our Constitution. And finally, you go to the vision statement for our country. And as Dr. Jess mentioned earlier, we decided that instead of just have a long-term vision to 2046, which is 100 years from our liberation as an independent republic in 1946. It's also 60 years from the EDSA revolution. We have 4 milestones. And in summary, these 4 vision statements are what? For 2028, our vision is to achieve socioeconomic recovery from the ravages of COVID-19 and the building of a solid platform for good governance and responsible citizenship. I'll expand this vision statement later. For 2034, the vision statement is focused on climate or environmental justice. And for the 2040, we adopted this on the government's ambition natin 2040, which defines the aspiration of the Filipino for his country. And we said that if we can achieve this by 2040, then the Filipino's aspiration for himself, as defined in the Ambition 2040 vision statement, can be realized by 2046. But the country has to first achieve the vision of the Filipino for his country in 2040. So why 2046? Again, 100 years after our liberation, 60 years after the EDSA, and being 24 years away makes this country roadmap free from personalities. So let's go back to the vision statements. For 2028, what is the vision statement? That we shall have fully recovered from the socio-economic setback brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. We shall have built a solid platform of good governance and responsible citizenship from which to take off, and on a reversible and sustained trajectory toward the transformation of the Philippines and the comprehensive and participatory development of the Filipino. 6 years later, by 2034, we envision that we will enjoy the protection, safety, and resiliency from climate change by the country switching to a sustainability mindset and holding institutions accountable for worsening conditions of the environment. We call this climate justice or environmental justice. We need to focus on that after the first 6 years from today. And by 2040, there are actually 2 vision statements of NEDA. The original one was composed under the leadership of Secretary Balisacan when he was still NEDA in 2015. The vision was that for the country, the Philippines shall be a country where all citizens are free from hunger and poverty, have equal opportunities, enabled by a fair and just society that is governed with order and unity, a nation where families live together, thriving in vibrant, culturally diverse, and resilient communities. A few years into the Ambition 2040 project, the government has somehow tweaked it a little bit so that the new vision statement now stands at, by 2040, the Philippines shall be a prosperous middle-class society. Right now, we're considered middle class as a country at GDP per capita about 3,500. You need to be at least $10,000 per capita before you can become a middle class society. But the society where nobody is poor. People live long and healthy lives, are smart and innovative. The country is a high-trust society where families thrive in vibrant, culturally diverse, and resilient communities. Okay. So either version is okay. What's important is that the vision of the Filipino for his country is clear to everybody. And once the country achieves this dream, you work on the Filipino. And therefore, our vision for 2046 is that Filipinos shall enjoy a strongly rooted, stable, and comfortable lifestyle, secure in the knowledge that we have enough for our daily needs and expected expenses. This was explained to be medical and hospitalization and other emergencies, and that we can plan and prepare for our children's future. Our families shall live in a place of our own, and we have freedom to go where we desire, protected and enabled by a clean, efficient, and just government that deals with the people equitably and fairly. This is the vision of the Filipino for himself, according to Ambisyon Natin 2040. So you have the core values, you have the mission, then you have the vision in 4 milestones. The next step for the 100 or so delegates of the convocation was, where is nation building? What are the strategic perspectives in nation building? In ICD, in the work that we did in ICD and ISA, we always look at about 4 to 5 strategic perspectives. That's people, process, customers or constituency, finance, and socioeconomic impact. Nation building is a lot more complex than a roadmap for an LGU, for a government agency, or for a corporation. And so the group discussed what those 8 strategic facets are of nation building. And this was mentioned by Dr. Jess earlier. It starts with moral and spiritual facet. And then you have the socio-cultural facet, and this will be explained later, and political facet. These are foundational in nature. So these are foundational categories, these 3 strategic facets of nation building. The next one is the resources category, and that includes human resources in all of its ramifications of education, health, peace and order, and so on. And then the third category is infrastructure, which includes the physical facet, our technological digital facet, and our economic financial facet. So once we agreed in this convocation on those 8 strategic facets for nation building, we went into identifying the strategic objectives under each strategic facet. To give you a flavor of that, and what you have here is a summary statement of the objectives, and the document on Dream Philippines has a lot more details on and description of what each of these strategic objectives are. But they are the following. For moral spiritual, so facet, we're looking at 3 strategic objectives. To establish a virtuous-based society. And the explosion of that summarized strategic objective, for example, in the document, is that to build a humane and virtuous-based society, Filipino society, that is anchored in truth, social justice, solidarity, shared prosperity, and responsible citizenship. So we summarize that into a statement of objective that says, we want a virtuous-based society. We also have the objective of developing deeply spiritual, ethical, and moral foundations for our people. And this includes family, this includes quality of life for our people. And third, objectives on human rights, religious freedom, and the spirit of enterprise and the entrepreneurial spirit. So this is the moral, spiritual aspect, facet of nation building. What about the sociocultural aspect? For sociocultural facet, we're talking about a deep sense of patriotism, each and every Filipino. We have strong family institution where quality of life is important and the preservation of a rich cultural heritage. And that includes not only arts and culture, but even our heritage sites, for example, for tourism purposes. We have a lot of very valuable heritage assets, from historical venues to fantastic facilities all over the country. Our Mayon volcano, our Taal Lake, and many other parts of our country. So we need to preserve those rich cultural heritage, plus our music, our poets, and all of the other aspects of culture. So the third facet is the political facet. And this is a more sensitive and more difficult one. And we're looking at three strategic objectives. First is we need to strengthen, integrate, and harmonize political institutions so that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing and so on. This is a huge statement, and it is explained in the document that we have produced. Second is we need to have a mature electoral process and civic consciousness of the people. So it's not just the electoral process that we need to build and to mature. It is also the need to make or help our people become more civic conscious, thinking of the country. And of course, the third strategic objective in the political facet of our nation's life is stable national peace and security. We cannot have all of this if we're always fighting or warring and so on. So those are the three foundational facets for nation building: moral, spiritual, sociocultural, and political facets. For the resources category, we have the human resources, and that includes universal health care, continuing education for all, peaceful and safe and secure communities, and promotion of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and dual vocational training with strong values components. So those are the four strategic objectives that is part of Dream Philippines. For natural resources, we have another three strategic objectives. We need to protect, conserve, and judiciously develop our marine resources. We should also responsibly develop our mountain and mineral resources and greater attention to food security and sustainability. The next facet is now the physical facet, which is now going into infrastructure. First, we need to devise, master plan, and execute quality and efficient transport for infrastructure in all the three modes of land, sea, and air transport. Water adequacy and water security is crucial. So is energy efficiency and energy security. And of course, environmentally sensitive waste management. Four strategic objectives on the physical facet of nation building. And the last two facets are technological, digital, and economic and financial. What are those strategic objectives related to those facets? Access to technology for all. Knowledge-driven, competitive digital ecosystem, and global standard information and communication technology infrastructure. Again, that is described in the Dream Philippines package that these 100 or so representatives have developed. And finally, economic and financial facet. We want to be competitive and promote ease of doing business in this country. We also want to develop a production and maintenance mindset, resulting in expanded output and improved incomes. No more of those roads and buildings and highways that we have built and not maintained, so that after a few years, they deteriorate. We have to have a maintenance mindset. We also need to have strong economic fundamentals. You want to solve the issue of poverty, develop your economic variables and have very strong economic fundamentals. And MSMEs need support. They provide 90+% of jobs available. So the more strong the MSE sector is, the more jobs can be created. We need them to help them with their development finance. And finally, continue to have focused fiscal and monetary policies. I think between Governor Saiti Tanco and his colleagues in the last 10, 15 years, we've done well in terms of fiscal and monetary policies. So that seems like a very complicated set of vision, mission, values, 8 strategic facets, 28 strategic objectives. And that is summarized in one-page document, which is the roadmap. I know it's not very readable, but if you have a copy of the Dream Philippines package, that is all explained there. But in one page, you have the roadmap for a proposed roadmap for a country. It includes the core objective of that project, which is the transformation of our country, the comprehensive development of the Filipino, our core values of maka-Diyos, maka-bansa, maka-tao, maka-kalikasan, our statement of mission, which is a preamble of our country, and the 4 vision statements in the various milestones of 2028, 2034, 2040, and 2046. You have the 8 facets for nation building and the strategic objectives opposite each facet that is summarized in front of you. And they're color-coded, maroon for the foundational facets, the blue for the resources facet, and the green for the infrastructure facet. Now, how do we know that we are on the right track? And by the way, this is an evolving roadmap. So one of the things we did was to see if this is consistent with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs of the United Nations. And this is what came out of that comparison. The roadmap versus the 17 SDGs. These are the facets, these are the strategic objectives, and these are the areas, the SDGs, 1 to 17, and whether our strategic objectives are hitting the SDGs. And yes, all of them have at least 1 or 2 or 3. Some are as many as 8 SDGs in one strategic objective. And another thing is that out of the 28 strategic objectives, we find 21 of those objectives addressing the poverty issue in this country. So we seem to be on the right track. But we know that a roadmap, a strategy map, is composed of nice words, nice statement, very noble statements. But the challenge is how to bring this down to doables, to actions and strategies. So the challenge to any strategy design and formulation is how to convert the nice sounding governance charter, strategy map, and so on, how to go down to the level of principles and words into the level of practices and actions. And the conveners and sectoral representatives in this Dream Philippines 2046 project spent a lot of time developing initiatives that will execute the above mentioned 28 strategic objectives. And they actually have come up with 140 proposed initiatives for the periods 2022 to 2028, with corresponding measures or metrics. But the next step will be to establish the baselines on these initiatives and to develop the targets for 2028, 34, 40, and 46. It will look like another one page. The country scorecard can be shown in one page, where again, you have these 8 facets, the 28 strategic objectives. Who will do them? Either the government or the private sector or both. What are the metrics? What are the baselines and the targets for 2028, 34, 40, and 46? And of course, a list of strategic initiatives. So far, we have developed 140 initiatives. So this is still work in progress. This is to be done. And we're hoping that a group like the PSA, Philippine Statistics Authority, who's already monitoring 600 indicators, or the universities like the UANP governance unit or governance school can help us develop the baseline targets for next year, for 6 years from now, 12 years from now, 18 years from now, and 24 years from now. And we hope that we can succeed with this in building our Dream Philippines. So the steering committee of Dream Philippines, led by our chairman and founder, Dr. Jess, acknowledged the contribution of these 100 or so conveners, volunteers, and sectoral representatives who worked for 4 months to craft this roadmap. We also thank ICD and ISA boards of trustees for supporting CEG in these ambitious and audacious projects. So, what are the next steps? We have submitted this proposed roadmap to some of our friends in government, to our former trustee in ICD and ISA, Fred Pascual, who is now the Secretary of Trade and Industry. He was part of the convener group that crafted this. We've sent this copy to Secretary Balisacan, reminded him that he started all of these things in 2015, and now he might consider looking at it again and making that part of the Philippine Development Plan. And we hope to send this to the Senate and Congress. We'll roll this out starting today, and we will form a group of 8 eminent persons, this EPG, Eminent Persons Group, 1 EPG per strategic facet. There are 8 strategic facets. You will have somebody in charge of that strategic facet. And then we'll need 28 champions who will focus on each of those 28 strategic objectives. And we'll need these people from those who are attending today to volunteer to tell us if you're interested to be one of the champions of the 28 strategic areas. And then the EPG and the champions will need to identify which of the initiatives can be done by the government and by the citizen groups. Then we establish the baselines, the targets, and this will complete the work on the country scorecard. The final step is really for many of you who are in this audience to join the community of governance advocates that Dr. Jess was talking about. This ends my presentation. I'd like to thank you for listening, and hopefully on the chat box, you'll volunteer to help us build our Dream Philippines. And yes, by the way, save this date. On November 9, 2022, we'll have a digital symposium on building our Dream Philippines. It will be a one-day forum on creating a community of objectives of advocates for Dream Philippines. Dr. Jess will talk more about this Dream Philippines. I will talk on personal governance for Dream Philippines. Attorney Teddy Cala will talk on citizenship leadership for Dream Philippines, and Attorney Alex Lacson will talk about community and social responsibility for Dream Philippines. This is the basic content for the community of governance advocates. Once you finish this symposium, you'll be, if you're interested, sworn in as a CGA or a member of the community of governance advocates, and will be proactively involved in the completion of the work for Dream Philippines and execution of the same. That ends my presentation, and we are now open to questions. Now, on the questions, many of you had the initiative, and we're very pleased to receive those. While those in attendance, they are still crafting their questions, may I just read some of the questions that were sent to us. First, from Anthony Antiquiera, what's your stand on our economy under President Marcos? It's too early to say. He's only 2-3 months old as president. But he has appointed good people like Secretary Balisacan, Ben Jokno, Fred Pascual, among others. And he also added Secretary Lutilia, Secretary Luizaga, and these are all good appointments. So we're hopeful that these people will be the people who will help us push this Dream Philippines project. There's a question from Romel Ancheta. His group is on talent development. How do we reimagine what competencies or knowledge and skills technically are needed for the next decade, and what governance structures should be in place to sustain our growth? My answer to that, Romel, is join us, be a corporate governance advocate, and we will ask you to help develop the initiatives that will precisely address the issues that you raised. How different is the 2046 vision to the Ambition 2040 of NEDA? Asks Joselito de Jesus. Well, the vision statement of NEDA for 2040 is already included in the Ambition, not in the Dream Philippines 2046. We just split the two vision statements of NEDA. NEDA's Vision 2040 includes both the ambition of the Filipino for the country and for himself. We decided to split those. We'll say, let's attain the country objective first, the vision first, by 2040. And once the country achieves that, then we can make sure that the vision of the Filipino for himself by 2046 can be accomplished. And the only innovation we had was we added 2 other milestones for 2034, which is environmental justice, and 2028, which is recovery from the COVID pandemic, both economical and social, and then setting the foundation for good governance or responsible citizenship. Dan Agustin has come up with a dozen questions, and let me quickly go through them. Do you incorporate in the Dream Philippines, the Philippine Development Plan, UN Millennium Development Goals? Yes, because Dream Philippines work on the NEDA's Ambition natin 2040, and we've matched that with not the Millennium Development Goals, but the 17 SDGs, which replace the Millennium Development Goals. So we are aligned to those. What form of government? Our assumption that will still be a democracy. What economic system? Will still be what we'd like to think a stakeholder capitalism type of economic system. Still capitalism, but stakeholder-centric, which means with equal emphasis to the stakeholders, customers, employees, communities, suppliers, stockholders, and of course the environment. What economic system will we have? As I said earlier, will still be the same. Will political dynasties be still there? Well, that's something that people will have to decide. If they like political dynasties, then that will continue. Nothing that we can do in the Philippines prevent that without being undemocratic. But yes, sa totoo lang, there are good dynasties. And we've seen this operate in Bataan, for example, the Garcia family. We've seen this in many other places, but not all of them are good. What do you foresee religious institutions? Will they be neutral in elections or be partisan like in the last elections? Well, just to inform you, last July, I conducted a strategic planning session for the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Manila, and they have developed a similar roadmap for the renewal of the Archdiocese for the future. And Cardinal Advincula brought 40 of his priests to discuss for 2 days the roadmap for the Archdiocese of Manila, complete with vision, mission, values, complete with strategic perspectives, complete with strategic objectives, and the scorecard for the Archdiocese. So we hope we can infect the other dioceses in this country to do the same thing. Who will implement the Dream Philippines and roadmap? Well, both government and the private sector. As Dr. just emphasized, we cannot let government just do everything. We as a people must be proactive in building our Dream Philippines. Besides, we've always claimed in our advocacy that ang pag-asa ng bayan wala sa Malacanang. Ang pag-asa ng bayan nasa mamamayan. Next question is, will you need a change in the Constitution? Well, if you want to bring in, let's say, more investors so they can provide more jobs and so on, we may have to start looking at changing the economic provisions of our Constitution. But there is, because it's a basically solid Constitution. Do you conceive that for the Philippines to be strong, do you prescribe that we must build our own nuclear arsenal? No. Thank you, but no. We will not spend our resources building a nuclear arsenal. We'll do it for generational power, maybe, but not for arsenal for war. Will it be a poverty-free society economically and intellectually? Yes, of course. Because the dream of the Filipino is that there should be no more poverty in this country, or at least insignificant level of poverty. Like Singapore has 0% poverty. Will there be no more agrarian issues between landowners and land stealers? Well, hopefully our congressmen and senators will pass the laws that will make agrarian issues finally be resolved. Will terrorism and rebellion simply be archived? We don't know. Depends on the kind of government that we will have moving forward. What will be the projected employment statistical figure in the dream? Well, as we said, if you grow at 8 to 10% GDP per annum, you will hit the poverty line. And if you do that consistently for the next 24 years, by the end of the 24 years, we should be we have a condition of full employment and low poverty. Dr. Paz Alberto asks the question, how will we improve tourism? Well, we did not particularly touch tourism in the Dream Philippines, but again, depending on the work groups that will help 28 champions craft the initiatives, sorry, then we'll have tourism, because tourism has many facets. You have heritage tourism, you have physical attractions like Mayon, but you also have other types of tourism like agri-tourism that Secretary Puyat was pushing during her time. Why 2046? We explained that already. Why 2046? He wanted this to be long-term, not dependent on personalities. It's also a good coincidence that it will be 100 years from the time that they were liberated from the Americans and 60 years after EDSA. You know, even Moses took 40 years to cross the desert. And we're giving ourselves 60 years from EDSA to find our place in the sun as a country. Excuse me. Aligned for Ambition 2040? Of course it is aligned. How can the private sector help? Join us. Be a corporate, a community, be a member of the community of governance advocates, so we can work on Green Philippines strategy execution in the years to come. How can the current COMELEC composition be corrected? Well, we're not equipped to answer that question. What are the roles of government, private sector, NPOs, religious church groups, in the futuristic Dream Philippines? Critical roles. This is a project for the Filipino, for his country, and for himself. So it needs all of the sectors of society, whether it's government, business, civil society, all of those. As one of the questions asked, will this apply to sorbiteros and to sari-sari store owner? Yes, they have the role to play. And then finally, I would like to know what are the prospects for business organizations in the Philippines in 2046. I guess if we do this right and we focus on the strategic facets of nation building, we pursue the 28 strategic objectives, and we execute the 140 or so initiatives, then we'll get there. And this was contributed by Ms. Grace Marisol. Regine, are there more questions? These are the questions that were sent to us before the workshop or before the symposium. I'm sure there are others. I see 76 items in the chat group. Can you help me with those, Regine? Or
Yes,
Thea?
sir. Thea here. So we have a few questions in the Q&A and in the chat box. I'll be reading a few of them. The first is from an anonymous attendee. Thank you for this yet again another national initiative. Dr. Jess and Sir Rex noted that the milestones 2028, 2034, 2040, and 2046 are presidential election years. Were these intended or simply happen to be reasonable intervals to monitor progress of Green Philippines?
Good question, but just to remind you, Thea, that Dr. Lim raised his hand. So we'll alternate between the chat questions, the Q&A questions in Zoom, and then those who will raise their hand. So we'll do alternate. Okay.
Yes, sir. All right.
To answer the question, yes, it's a good way to when we decided on why 28, 34, 40, and 46, and that coincided with the changing of the administrations, assuming that we stay with the 6-year term. So there is a reckoning, because what the champions and the volunteers will do is develop short-term, medium-term, long-term strategic objectives and initiatives. And so it will be a good scorecard, let's say, for the president in 2028. What has he achieved according to those 8 strategic facets for nation building? How has he done with the people aspect, human resources? How was he done with natural resources? How was he done with moral, spiritual? How was he done with sociocultural and the political reforms and the technological, digital, and the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and social and economic and financial? So this will be a good way to also start looking at the performance scorecard, not only of the country, but also of the leaders of this country. Next question.
Okay, so we have one from the chat box from Miss Luz Bimindan Nietes. So isn't 2040 and 2046 too long to aim for growth and improvement? Do we have anything short or medium term to look forward to? A clear roadmap may also be helpful to guide everyone and to ensure success in the long term, despite the turnover of power and authority to different country leaders. Just a personal thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Good question, because as you probably know, the country roadmap of Singapore is up to the year 2065, and they crafted this in 2015. So that's a 50-year planning horizon. That's Singapore. We're only doing this for 24 months with milestones and base camps every 6 years. Yes, I think it's long enough and short enough, long enough to cover long-term strategic positioning for the country, but sure enough for many of us in the audience can still live to see whether by 2040 we will be achieving this. No, I don't dream of reaching, I'm now 75 years of age, and I don't think I have that. I have 24 more years to go. Okay, Dr. Lim was raising his hand. Can you call him?
Yes, sir. Mr. Lim will be promoting you as a panelist, and you may ask your question to sir.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, this afternoon has been a wonderful experience listening to the presentations. I think my simple question is, are the 4 speakers for November committed to be to spearhead as well as to steward this Dream Philippines 2046 to its end for as long as you live?
The quick
That's
answer,
all.
the quick answer, Dr. Lim, is yes, and not only the five speakers. Dr. Jess is committed to this. I am
Yes.
very committed to this.
Yes.
Eddie Calao is committed. As a matter of fact, he and Alex Lacson were part of the conveners group that crafted the roadmap, and they're going to be part of the intellectual task force that will be rolling this out in all kinds of fora to spread the gospel of good governance and the the Dream Philippines 2046. Yes, we are committed to follow this, but we'll need more champions. We need 28 champions, volunteers. We need 8 eminent persons to compose the some kind of the steering committee that will make sure that 8 of the facets that we have enumerated will be attended to, and the respective strategic objectives will be attended to. So we're looking for those volunteers, Dr. Lim.
Well, thank you very much for your commitment, sir.
Okay. Leah, next.
Yes. Just a clarification. If you will be raising your hand, we will not promote you to panelists, but we will allow you to talk. All right, sir, for the next question from the Q&A from Mr. Edward Jorna. I wonder if this roadmap should be vetted in a more broad-based body, which includes representatives from all social classes. Is this the plan too?
A very good question, Ed. As a matter of fact, if I can say that we have an area for improvement, this roadmap is the involvement of the other sectors. You know, the almost 100 conveners, delegates, and sectoral representatives included former government officials, former cabinet secretaries, former ambassadors, former chiefs of staff. We had 2 generals and 1 police general, part of the volunteers. We had students. We have student council presidents from the colleges. We have journalists and so on and so forth. So, but we needed to complete this project by June 30. That was the ultimate deadline because we wanted to present this to the new new government that would come in by July 1. So we were not able to include in the dialogue, in the convocations, representatives from labor, from the D&E, for example. Now, we didn't have time to bring in bicycle drivers and sari-sari store owners and so on. And it would be good to do that, but I think this can be handled in the future by the champions who will make sure that all sectors of society will have inputs in terms of identifying the additional initiatives and the measures and the targets that they will develop for the future. But that's a good question, Ed. Yes, we apologize that we could not gather everyone that represents all the sectors of society, but I think we have enough representation as far as the youth, the women, the professionals, the businessmen, the academe, and all the other sectors, except for the D&E that we have not had time to recruit. But they should be recruited once the strategy execution activity starts. Thank you for the question, Ed. Next, Tia.
From the chat box, we have someone asked what form of government? A federal parliamentary form of government with no more political dynasties.
Yeah, well, I think we already answered that. That is a decision of the people. And so the idea is to make sure that our people are educated enough to know right from wrong, to choose the better candidates to, and if they want to change the form of government from presidential, Republican to federal, that is a decision of the people. And they just have to be given the right information so that they can make informed decisions. But Dream Philippines does not make any assumption. And besides, we can only anticipate so much of the future, but we cannot predict everything that will happen in the future. Thank you.
Right, sir. So we have another one from the chat box from Mr. Angelito Gabriel. So integrity is the essence of everything successful, according to Buckminster Fuller, an American architect. What are the baseline standards set to achieve the 3 strategic objectives under the moral spiritual facets?
What was the question again? What are the
baseline standards set to achieve the 3 strategic objectives under the moral spiritual facets?
Let me review my notes. That's a very difficult question to answer, but let me try reviewing my notes there. That's a very good question. Okay, first is virtuous-based society. To build humane, virtuous-based Filipino society that is anchored on truth, justice, solidarity, patriotism, shared prosperity, and responsible citizenship. So all of those elements, all of those character, all of those behaviors that will help build a humane and virtuous-based society is there now. The standards will be standards of responsible citizenship that includes patriotism, that includes love of country, and so on and so forth. The other strategic objective in that facet of moral spiritual is deeply spiritual, ethical, and moral foundation, and that is defined as to deepen the spiritual, ethical, moral foundations in public and private institutions. So, which means that integrity will be part of that, and in public and private institutions, and promote fairness, accountability, transparency, and servant leadership. And finally, on human rights, religious freedom, and the spirit of the enterprise, the definition is that to uphold fundamental human rights and dignity, religious freedom, and spirit of enterprise in all facets of business, government, and civil society interactions. And then that is exploded further by the metrics, the initiatives that are proposed in those three strategic objectives within the facet of moral, spiritual. I guess in the end, maybe since this is in digital form, if you can send a request to have a digital copy of this whole document, that this is, I don't know whether it's visible for everyone, but this is the package, our Dream Philippines. And this is about 61 pages, and many of the details are in this package. Thank you. So next, please.
All right, so the next question is from Mr. Ramon Agustines. What countries do you feel are models for our own roadmap?
Well, I guess the whole exercise of developing the roadmap use the basic framework that we've been doing all these years now in ICD and ISA. And we use the Kaplan-Norton Balanced Scorecard framework in strategy design and strategy execution. So many cities, many countries have adopted this. Many Fortune 500 companies have adopted this framework. As I said, our neighbor Singapore has been using the Balanced Scorecard framework for long-term planning for Singapore for many years now. I know there are many cities that are doing this. Many Fortune 500 companies are doing this. So there are many similarly placed communities that are using the Balanced Scorecard framework in strategic planning, in country road mapping. So this has been very successfully done in different areas. Okay.
Sir, so we have one from Dr. Catherine Te. How can we overcome challenges of increasing cost of medicines and care, shortage of healthcare personnel, nurses and doctors, lack of transparency, cancer, registries, research and development initiatives, and many more disconnect in healthcare?
Yes, that's why one of the key objectives in human resources is really universal healthcare. And it's not just providing healthcare, but doing it properly. As I said earlier, our group, ISA, for example, has focused on helping hospitals develop their roadmaps, their governance charter, vision, mission, values, their strategic objectives, their performance scorecards, and they go through a 4-stage development process in the performance governance system, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. And we have actually, that has helped transform many of our hospitals into being the best hospital that they can be in their respective areas. And that includes not only delivery of healthcare services, but including the management, proper management of their hospitals with accountability, transparency, et cetera, et cetera. So by going through this performance governance system, or PGS or ISA for the hospitals, they're able to precisely address some of the issues that the good doctor has identified. Yes, there are many problems in the healthcare sector, and Dr. Stanislao has mentioned that earlier. But precisely, we need each of the sectors of our society, both government and the professionals who are in that sector, to precisely share the burden of nation building. And that includes doing our work properly, doing our roles properly. Excuse me.
For the next question, may we know the exact duties and responsibilities of the 28 volunteer champions and the 8 EPGs? Also, what skill sets or qualifications would you require? This is just to manage expectations from both sides. Thank you. And this is from Miss Lorico.
Good point. Yes, of course, we have our network of people that we know, the people who are eminently placed in our society. And we will try to recruit as many heavyweights as possible. So it's not just the caliber and quality of the person, but also their familiarity with the stakeholders. Like the point raised earlier, do we get inputs from the lower socioeconomic classes, from the other sectors, not part of the convocation that we're holding? Yeah. So, so the answer is we'll try to recruit as many learned, experienced people to help us execute the roadmap, starting with the 8 eminent persons group, 8 eminent persons to manage the each of the 8 strategic facets. We'll need 28 champions who are experts in, for example, universal healthcare. So we need somebody who's a champion who is familiar with the healthcare sector. For education, continuing education for all, we need an education expert. For strengthen the family institution, we need, people who have been working the family governance activity like the Edu Child Foundation all these years. So we'll try to identify as many possible volunteers who can help us do this. Now, each champion will need help. We'll need a team to, one, help them recalibrate the initiatives, the measures, and target setting, baselining, target setting for each and every strategic objective. They'll need a lot of help there. So we'll need experts. And again, as I said, for those of you who feel that you can contribute to this total effort, since this is our country and this is what we're trying to build, please volunteer. Please send your notice of interest to be a volunteer for this group, and then we'll go through a process of identifying the fit for these people. So, but please volunteer. Thank you.
All right. So we have one from an anonymous attendee. This is a very audacious goal. Concern is how not to be politicized while wanting to help. How does one go about helping this advocacy?
Oh yeah, Dr. Jess, myself, the ICD fellows, the trustees of ICD, ISA, and the directors of CEG are all very conscious of not politicizing this. We've built our reputation as non-political, non-partisan group of advocates in the corporate sector and the government sector. We work with government, but we are not partisan. And we've tried to maintain that independence and detachment all these years. And ISA and ICD are now almost 25 years old. We wouldn't last 25 years if somehow we're identified as being partisan. Yes, we get involved in the political life of this country, and all Filipinos should be political. They have to fight for their country, so they have to be political. But what we are not is we are non-partisan. We can work with any organization, as we have worked with more than 200 NGAs, LGUs, and GOCCs in the last 20-25 years. So not to worry, we will not be partisan.
Sir, so from Dan Agustin, On the makalikasan aspect and economic facet, how shall the interests of the IPs and the mining sector be reconciled?
Well, there is a process of resolving issues between, let's say, mining companies and the IPs. And as a matter of fact, we went through that process. If you, just for your information, we have this major infrastructure project in Iloilo called the Halaor Dam, which is going to be finished in next 24 months. It has already started. It's more than 50% completed. And they went through the process of making sure that the IPs, the 40 or so families affected by this dam project, will be relocated to a better location and so on and so forth. And they went through the process. As a matter of fact, the project was delayed about 3 years just because of that issue. So there is a process in place, and what we should be able to advise the private sector is not to forget to respect the needs of the people that they will displace because of their projects. And we follow the law, we follow that process.
Sir, so from Mr. Ilagan, is adherence to free market tenets a focal point in the economic agenda of Dream PH?
Well, fortunately, many of our advocates and supporters are free market oriented people. We do not believe in government controlling the economy. Governance should be left to government, while business should be left to business. And so this free market approach to economic development, to us, is still the best way to encourage innovation, encourage growth, and so on. But the new thing now about the free market economy, it cannot be totally capitalistic or free market. There needs to be attention. As we have signed, there are 28 business organizations who have signed a year or two ago the Covenant for Shared Prosperity, where business organizations, all the 28 huge organizations from the Management Association, Makati Business Club, Philippine Chamber of Commerce, and so on, ICD and ISA are all signatories to that. Is we signed a Covenant for Shared Prosperity. And this has been the dramatic shift, and this is a global trend, where stockholder-centered businesses are giving way to stakeholder-centered businesses. In America, 180 top CEOs have signed this commitment to be more stakeholder-centric and to share prosperity rather than just be focusing on total shareholder returns. In the Philippines, 28 large business organizations with hundreds, if not thousands, of companies who are members of those associations have signed the Covenant for Shared Prosperity, which commits giving value to customers, employees, communities, suppliers, stockholders, and of course, the environment. So we are addressing that issue. And yes, free market is still a preferred formula for development. And we're just saying that, yes, we'll allow people to do not so much as they please within boundaries, but let them commit to shared prosperity, sharing prosperity. And that is the push that we are doing in even in ICD when we talk about sustainability, ESG, and so on. So we are proponents for shared prosperity.
All right, sir. So from an anonymous attendee, given that COVID dealt a powerful blow to the PH during the peak of build that depleted financial resources of the country, we are in a delicate stage of rebuilding. What is the quote-unquote got hit by the bus caveat strategy you are proposing while we are striving to rebuild PH?
Well, that is a recognized burden that we have to carry. The cost to our people and to our economy of COVID has been tremendous. As I said earlier, poverty line has gone back to the 20s. At one point in time, 7.5 million Filipinos lost their jobs. 100,000 plus businesses closed during the pandemic, and so on and so forth. Our debt has grown from 5 billion to 5 trillion to 13 trillion in a span of 5 years. And we have to pay for that debt. And the only way we can afford to repay those debts and to still promote growth and address the issue of poverty and equality and so on is really to grow faster than before. If you have grown 4% a year, that is not enough. We need to grow 8 to 10% a year. That's why the Dream Philippines target is 8 to 10% growth all the way up to 2046. This year, we had gone back to about 7.4% for the first semester. We'll hit 7%. Hopefully, we can do 8% next year and so on and so forth. Because every time we break the 6% GDP growth, we hit the poverty line.
Sir, so our next question has two parts. So the first one is, would you agree to a more or less permanent nationwide comprehensive land use plan for the Philippines? And second, what is the outlook of Dream Philippines in relation to Bangsamoro law or similar local legislation?
Okay, on the national land use, I believe there's a pending bill in Congress about the national land use plan. And even as we speak, talk about national land use plan, many of the enlightened LGUs, especially those that have gone through the performance governance system, the PGS process of ISA, has actually shown remarkable consciousness, awareness, and dedication to have a fair and equitable land use plan for the respective LGUs. The second question is about what, Thea?
Sir, for a while.
Yeah, the second question.
So what is the outlook for Dream Philippines in relation to
Dream
Bangsamoro law or
Yeah.
similar
Okay.
local legislation?
I think we have been trying to solve in the past the Muslim issue with gunpowder, and we've paid very dear for that wrong strategy. The whole of nation approach in solving the not only the Muslim issue but also the insurgency issue in general is really development. And the more our country develops and the development brought down to all the regions, all the provinces, especially in war-torn areas, if you can bring the whole of government approach to do this, plus elements of Dream Philippines, where we're trying to provide growth in all of the sectors, then we can help alleviate the sufferings of the people that have triggered these separatist and insurgency movements. But there will be birthing pains, as we're seeing in the Bangsamoro law, the execution of which have suffered fits and stops. But that's part of growing, that's part of growth, that's part of learning. And for as long as we develop that sense of patriotism, that need for makabansa, applying the value of makabansa, doing what is good for our country, then I think towards the end we will achieve the long peace that we have long aspired for, especially in the South, and even in the insurgency movement with the communists and the NPAs. We will need to work together, and it has to be a whole of nation approach. We're approaching 6 o'clock. We said this will be up to 6, so we have time for maybe 2 questions.
Right, sir. So for the last two questions, um, we have from Mr. Fernando Valdivia. I heard from an economist that a social democratic form of government would be advisable for sustainable development. Do you agree with that? Thank you.
I'm not an economist. I'm a governance advocate. So whatever works, whatever works. And there are many forms of economic initiatives. The Social Democrats of Germany have their own thinking. There's Christian Democrats, and there are many permutations of democracy. And I think we've gone through the Republican system since 1946, and we have stayed to that with that form of government and governance since 1946. And with a roller coaster ride all these years. So we're still struggling, as Dr. Paul Dummel says. We are not yet a nation. We are a nation in progress. We are a work in progress as a nation. So let's give ourselves time to find our place in the sun. And we're hoping that the roadmap that we are proposing, that we're launching today, is the Dream Philippines, will help achieve that vision of a better Philippines, of a transformed Philippines, and a Philippines that will ensure the comprehensive development of the Filipino, by the Filipino, for the Filipino. Final question.
All right, sir. So for the last question, don't you think that this project must have 100% support from the government to allocate budget, especially in educational system where we can inculcate the good values to our children?
No, this will not fly without government support. In other words, we're not submitting to the government to have specifically to get specific support for this project. No, some of these things that we are suggesting are already being thought of. As I said, part of the conveners group that was that crafted Dream Philippines was DTI Secretary Fred Pascual, who used to be trustee of ICD and ISA. He brings this consciousness to his new role now as Secretary of Trade and Industry. So we're hoping that he will be consistent, because many of the recommendations here also came from him. So, but yes, we will need the support of government, but the whole point that Dr. Jess was emphasizing earlier was government alone cannot establish our Dream Philippines as we envision it to be. It has to be a joint effort of government, enterprise or business, civil society, and the Filipino people. Everybody has to contribute to make this possible.
Thank you, sir. Would you be open to answering one last question? We have one participant who's raising his hand.
Okay, please.
All right. So, Mr. Mayoralgo, you may unmute and ask your question to Sir Rex.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for a great presentation. I have attended a lot of your programs in the past.
Oh,
Each time Mr. Lacson and Mr. Stanislao have a book signing or a book launch, I'm always there.
okay.
And I have been following, I buy all the books of Mr. Lacson also.
Okay.
My
Good
point
books.
is, I have been following closely the actions taken by such well-minded and professionally prepared minds, like your group. So, as I said in my printed questions here, the presentations present a solid theoretical framework for an integrated, comprehensive formulation of strategic directions.
Okay.
The key, of course, will always be in the implementation. Okay. The champions that you are trying to raise will have to grapple ultimately with what I call the Gordian knot of dynastic Philippine patronage politics that, as we all know, has a stranglehold in the setting of national direction, deployment of scarce economic resources, and even the propagation of values. Already, right now, we can see that education, which you yourself mentioned is a vital component for values formation, as well as history, are already major battlegrounds, no, in the defense and promotion of truth. So I submit again that real effective transformative change can only happen with a successful political exercise that would elect transforming servant leaders that you describe, that will embody the ideas and strategic directions that are presented here so competently. The big question is, will this movement be able to move into that realm effectively by 2028? Based on your presentation, by 2028, we would have a major transformation already in our society. Will volunteerism eventually lead to this need to be in the mainstream of political involvement? Without that, it would be very difficult to envision the effective change that we respect that you are presenting here. Of course, I respect your stand that it should be non-partisan, Rex, but I think eventually even values have a partisan nature to them. No? There's good and there's bad. So that's my question and comment. I just wanted to share that I've been following this group very closely. And my regards to Alex and Sir Stanislav.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, and for those kind words. But we are a hopeful bunch of advocates. The reason I'm saying hopeful is we've seen transformation, especially in the public sector. We've worked with, for example, 5 cities who transformed themselves into world-class governance models. You talk about city of Iloilo, the cities of San Fernando, La Union, and San Fernando, Pampanga. We talk about the city of Balanga. These are 4 LGUs, jewels in the countryside. You've seen the development of Iloilo, for example, from being the armpit of the Visayas, now a model of good governance, a model of a very pleasant, very welcoming, very hospitable, redeveloped city in the South. And so we have models like this. In the in the national government agencies, we've helped in the transformation of the military. If you remember 20 years ago, we had issues of some generals making a lot of money and people participating in extra constitutional activities, and the military was a mess. And we took them on in spite of the difficulty, and we were able to transform Philippine Navy, Philippine Army into a model of good governance. So much so that it also became, like those cities I mentioned, become models of governance as global Hall of Famers in governance. And from a very corrupt, controversial military that liked extra constitutional methods of change, transformed into a professional, organized organization that will defend the Constitution. And we've seen those transformations. Many other examples. I remember when before Pinoy came into being as president, Department of Public Highways was the model of corrupt, incompetent, inefficient government agency. And so Secretary Babesonson, who became Secretary of Public Works and Highways, brought us in and said, can you help us sort this out? And within 3 years, Babesonson was able to convert DPWH from a controversial, incompetent, corrupt organization to a model of good public governance. So it can be done. We've done this with many of the people that we've worked with. So we are very hopeful, Mr. Mayoralgo, that if you can do this with 200 government agencies, we can work on the rest of the bureaucracy. But we need a lot of help. We need a lot of help. So it can be done. Transformation can happen, and we're able to do this in corporations with our ICD advocacies on good professional governance. We were able to do it in the public sector, with the LGUs and the national government agencies, the hospitals. So we're quite hopeful. It will take a little time. That's why it will not happen overnight. And we're giving ourselves 24 years to achieve our dream Philippines. And I think we can do that with everybody's help. And of course, with God's grace, we can achieve those, the visions that we have set out for the country. And thank you for those comments, Sir Mayor.
All right, thank you everyone for sending in your questions. We do realize that there are a lot of unanswered questions, so we will compile all of these and then we will respond to them via email. So, Sir Rex, just a question from myself. We would like to know, how can we connect with you and volunteer?
Okay. Well, of course, you can contact me in my resume that I flashed earlier, the second slide. My contact details are there, my email address, my telephone number, which are also my Viber number. You can communicate if you want to volunteer as a eminent person or as a champion or as a volunteer advocate. But one of the things that we need to do is that we have to have the same basic content in your perspective in this advocacy. And we flashed the November 9 event, which will include personal governance, a 3-hour personal governance workshop, a 2-hour workshop on citizen leadership to be delivered by Attorney Teddy. And then Attorney Lacson will cover community and social responsibility. Armed with those 3 fundamental courses will be one criteria for you to become a community a member of the community of governance advocates. Because we need a certain base of knowledge, a certain base of attributes to be able to carry on the advocacy. So you need to not only have the governance skills so you can govern yourself well, but you can also govern others well. You cannot govern others if you cannot even govern yourself. Second is, what are your duties and challenges as a citizen of this country? The highest office in this country is the citizen's office. What have you done to develop that citizen leadership? And of course, community and social responsibility. You need to reach out to your barangay, to your homeowners association, the rest of society. You cannot just limit your activities to your career, your family. You have to reach out because we all are responsible for our community and society. And so that is the Alex Lacson component. If you have all of those, if you go through all of those courses by November 19th, then we can go and recruit you to become a volunteer for Green Philippines. We're gonna just pick you out. We need to train you. to be able to do these things properly. I hope that answers your question, Thea. Yes?
Yes.
Even,
Yes,
even if
thank
you're
you,
already
sir.
part of us, you still have to go through those courses to make
Okay.
sure that you have the right material and right knowledge in doing in volunteering for Dream Philippines.
Yes.
By the way, they can email me and they can text me, Viber me. If you can forward those questions that we didn't have time to read.
All right, sir. So we'll be sending the questions to you. And then for the presentation and the details for volunteering, we will be sending that to our participants as well.
Yeah. And then if they don't have this book, they can ask for the digital copy.
All right, sir. Thank you. Thank you for letting us know. Okay, so that ends our webinar. We thank everyone who allotted their time to join us today, especially to our guest speakers